displaced the indigenous population, ended up exterminating most of them. And that was recognized. Probably maybe 10 million or so in what's now the territorial United States. So by the year 2000, when the census was taken, there were a couple 100,000. And it was understood by the famous founding fathers that they were simply being exterminated. Well, that's what settler colonialism is. Israel didn't go that far, but the European settlers, originally European settlers, pre-1948, they overwhelmingly European. They took over as much of the land as they could. They displaced the population. They created their own Hebrew society, Hebrew labor, and so on and so forth. There were some elements of it. In fact, I was associated with them pre-48, who were interested in developing some kind of binational community, cooperative community, but they were a minority. The majority wanted to establish a Jewish state over as much of the territory as they could get hold of. It was a British mandate, and Palestinians kept pleading with the British to allow democratic elections, but of course the Zionist immigration wouldn't agree to that for obvious reasons. They were a minority. But finally came the 48 war. Israel substantially expanded, was founded as a state and expanded its territory. And then the next major step was 1967, plenty in between. But skipping to 1967, Israel conquered all of the former British mandate. And since then, it's been expanding settlement in the occupied territories, building infrastructure, radically expanding the state of Jerusalem, lots of terror and violence. It recognized right away that expansion into the territory, say building of settlements in the West Bank, was in violation of international law. That was never a question. But it continues, and it's bloody and brutal. Other events as well. The 5 invasions of Lebanon, one of them killed maybe 15,000, 20,000 people, destroyed much of southern Lebanon. The others are also pretty ugly. That's what's been going on. And it's not something that they are doing. It's something that we're participating in actively and crucially. And if we don't like it, we can stop it. We don't have to participate. And if the U.S. stops participating, Israel will have to refrain. They're very dependent on the United States.
It seems to me that a lot of the actions taken by Israelis against the Palestinians in the U.S., it seems to me that it's founded in somewhat of a moral absolutism, which in some way leads to fundamentalist views and actions. Is it moral absolutism that people, these decision makers like Benjamin Netanyahu, maybe Barack Obama, look at to make their decisions, what I'm doing is right and what I'm doing is for the right cause? And is moral absolutism in a way the solution as well? Because when you look to that, you can come up with a solution that what you are doing is wrong. What is your take on that?
I think it's accurate, but it's not general enough. In fact, it always makes good sense to look into the mirror. Let's take ourselves. As I say, I don't want to identify the two cases too closely, but both the United States and Israel are settler colonial societies, just like Australia. And that's not pretty. And one of the ways in which the settlers justify what they're doing is claiming that they're acting in self-defense. Well, there's always some truth to that. The indigenous population doesn't just say, fine, take my land and country, I'm going away. They usually resist. And that resistance is called terror by the invaders. And it's often extreme. The justifications are often, extremely dishonest. And again, look at ourselves. We greatly respect the Declaration of Independence, and it's published in the newspapers every July 4th. Very few people have actually read it, except for the first paragraph maybe, but read it sometimes. It has a series of charges written by Thomas Jefferson, the most libertarian of the founding fathers. It has a series of charges against the British monarchy, the British king. One of the charges is that he unleashed against us the merciless Indian savages whose known way of warfare is torture and murder and all sorts of other atrocities. Well, Thomas Jefferson was living there. He knew that he was describing the known way of warfare of the colonists. Yes, the merciless English settlers. Yes, in resistance, it was also true of the indigenous population. But nothing to compare with what the settlers were doing. And yet we read that every year, or at least pretend to, maybe our eyes glaze over, and it doesn't strike us. That's the kind of defense that is typically offered by aggressors. And we can accuse others of doing that, and we're right in accusing them, but we ought to at least recognize it in ourselves and then come to understand it better.
Many observers may note, however, that in order for a society like the United States to enjoy the luxuries that it does, exploitation in some form of low wages, child labor in third world countries is inevitable. Is that a fair assessment?
Certainly not inevitable, and it's not just in third world countries. I mean, we have a major economic crisis right here. You take a look, it's not on the third world level, we're such a rich country, but sort of structurally it's not dissimilar. For the last 30 years, real incomes in the United States have almost stagnated for the majority of the population, while a very tiny percentage, 1% or even 1/10 of 1%, has become fabulously wealthy. We all know that inequality in the United States is very high, but it's not usually recognized that most of that inequality has to do with very extreme wealth, literally 1/10 of 1%. And it did not come from, inexorable economic forces like globalization or rise of technology and so on. It came from very specific, planned, conscious government actions, redesigning tax rates, redesigning rules of corporate governance, deregulation, a lot of other government efforts which in fact were designed to achieve exactly this result, and did. And that's why you have such one consequence is tremendous anger and fear in the country, kind of unfocused anger, or maybe irrationally focused, but there are real causes. So it's not just the third world.
Well put. We're speaking with Noam Chomsky, author, intellectual, MIT professor. It seems that the lion's share of the problem, or at least the problem itself, is that most are unwilling to act or recognize that there is a problem at all. If that's the case, do you believe that the lion's share of the problem lies with powerful interests who cloak information of exploitation, or general American and Western willingness to shut out such negative information?
It's almost inevitable that people who have power and privilege will act in ways to maintain it and extend it. Now, in a more civilized society, you have counterforces that balance that and try to lead to a more equitable and just society. But that's a constant battle. I mean, if you just look at American history, that struggle has been going on since the 18th century, with various ups and downs. Sometimes there's a period of regression, like what we're now in. Sometimes there are significant advances, like the 1930s or the 1960s. But it goes on all the time. So, I don't like the idea of. I think we kind of mislead ourselves when we say, "Well, who do we blame?" I mean, these are institutional structures which we don't have to accept. But they are, as long as they're in place, they're going to lead in particular directions. I mean, take, say, the financial system. Everyone knows or should know that the major financial institutions, the banks, the investment firms, insurance companies, they have just created a huge crisis from which they are benefiting. The perpetrators of the crisis